Hello, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Anurekha Wagh, Assistant Professor at the Department of Sociology, Savitribai Phule, Pune University. I am coordinating the paper on Sociology of Gender. Today we are going to discuss a module on masculinities and feminities. Here in this module we will discuss the gender binary and the heterosexualization of desire. Not only we would discuss masculinities, especially in the way it is hegemonic and helps in the whole idea of subordination and how it is complicit in order to bring about inequality. Further, while trying to understand feminities, we will understand female masculinities and trans masculinities. Further, in this module, we will also explain about how in India, this idea about masculinities and feminities is explored in the context of gender, sex and patriarchy. Feminities and masculinities. Introduction. Michael Kimmel begins his introduction to the Gendered Society Reader 2004 by stating a well-known fact. Gender happens to organize a major part of our social life and our experiences of it. The meaning of gender can be interpreted in a number of ways. One meaning of gender denotes manness and womanness that are attributed to each pole of the gender binary. Conventionally, the terms femininity and masculinity refers to one's gender identity or the extent to which one identifies with a socio-cultural meaning of what it means to be a man or a woman. These differences of signifying a man or a woman apply over a whole range of variables like personality traits, behaviors, roles, rights and rewards. These differences are also normative, resulting in the creation of a cultural ideal. It is said that a child draws upon the socio-cultural understanding of what is meant by a man or woman and is socialized to develop a particular expression of gender identity and gender role. The process of socialization in its turn is modeled on a presumed linearity between biology and psychology. Sexual differences or the differences seen between men and women are said to be evident at three levels. Primary sex characteristics borne by one's chromosomes and sex organs XX, XY. Secondary sex characters, that is differences associated with the reproductive functions like breast, voice, body hair, said to be the effects of specific hormones flowing in the male and the female body. Tertiary sex differences expressed through differences in behavior, aggression, rationality, sexual activity being the hallmarks of masculine behavior and care, submission and sexual passivity being specific to femininity. However, children also find themselves departing from the conventional gender identity and its corresponding gender role models to take on a different gender role and or identity. In other words, a male child could grow up to be non-masculine to the extent of being feminine, and a female child may develop masculine, non-feminine gender identity. Anthropologists and social scientists have found the meanings of masculinity and femininity to vary across cultures, across historical time, over individual lifespan as well across genders. Men and women in different cultures embody different meanings and expressions of masculinity and femininity, and these would vary over a large spectrum across cultures. Second, masculinity and femininity could carry different connotations in the same culture at different times. So what it means to be a man today could very well be very different from what it meant in the last century. For example, third expressions of gender may vary in one individual over age. People are seen to undergo an evolving sense of gender identification at different stages of life. Fourth, men and women of the same culture have different perceptions of masculinity and femininity within their gender groups and live varied gender experiences. So within India, there are differences in the perception of masculinity between heterosexual and homosexual men, or differences in the experience of femininity between different ethnic groups. Femininity and masculinity are not universal essences constant over time and space. Rather, gender is an ever-changing fluid assemblage of meanings and behaviors. Connell states in his book Masculinities, the term masculine and feminine point beyond categorical sex difference to the ways men differ among themselves and women differ among themselves in the matters of gender. So one needs to rethink masculinity and femininity as plural. They mean different things at different points of time and in different situations. The above discussion also demonstrates that Femininity and masculinity are not innate but a result of social inputs, cultural expectations, and psychic aspirations. To the extent that gender is a social construct, there is also the possibility that a male person sees himself as feminine and a female-bodied person sees herself as masculine. Such persons are known as transgender or transsexual people. Today, feminities and masculinities are terms that are spoken of in plural, variously theorized, contested, and redefined by academics and activists alike. Central to these deliberations are attempts to unmoor them from conventional understandings of biological innateness and locate their meanings and significations historically, culturally, ideologically, and discursively. Gender itself has been interpreted through the feminist theory and politics in a number of ways. The introduction of the term gender into feminism was with the purpose of establishing the fact that women are not born as subordinate subjects but are socialized to be docile and subservient. This has also brought into analysis the workings of a societal structure based on the domination and oppression of one sex by the other. Thus, gender served as a category of analysis to critique a system where differences between men and women came to be understood not as natural, rather as socially constructed. These differences were further organized socially, politically, and epistemologically as homogeneous, exclusive, and hierarchical in a system that favors men by privileging the male worldview and masculine principles. To understand and resist the workings of patriarchal oppression, unpacking the categories of femininity and masculinity proved to be useful. However, normative definitions offer certain standards for these terms. Masculinity is what men ought to be, and femininity is what men ought to be. Biological, psychological, as well as sociological theories narrow the scope of understanding how notions of masculinities and feminities are not natural, neutral dispositions but are processes of becoming that spill over outside the body and psyche to create circles of power, submission, and dominance. That masculinities and feminities will have to be imagined and examined outside bodies and psyches is reiterated by Connell. Masculinity is not a fixed entity and embedded in the body or personality traits of individuals. Masculinities are rather configurations of practice that are accomplished in social action and therefore can differ according to the gender relations in a particular setting. This module will map the contours of the categories of feminities and masculinities and how they are constructed. It will also explore the roles played by the feminities and the masculinities in the production of sex and gender. We will look at how heterosexuality contributes to their production. The module will also discuss how feminities and masculinities are consolidated to take up different forms and what fractures them. Section 1. Gender binary and the heterosexualization of desire. Feminism has over the decades challenged the belief that sex and gender are biologically given and anatomy is destiny. It has demonstrated that gender is constructed and that there are more sexes than male and female. The sex-gender distinction has served as a basic framework for a great deal of feminist theory as well as feminist politics. Before the emergence of the second wave of the feminist movement in the late 1960s, sex was a word seen strongly associated with biologism. Differences between men and women were seen and believed to be rooted in biology. Gender was believed to flow from sex and remain tied to it by relations of one-directional causality. The sex as a concept suggested the natural, by implication biological, immutable ground for gender differences and hence the near impossibility of a radical change at this level. Women's social position as inferior subjects was said to be and inevitably flowing from their biology, their reproductive physiology to be precise, which restricted them to certain activities. Moreover, their sex-specific body characteristics, their organs and chromosomes and hormones were said to bear ample proof of their vulnerabilities. At such a juncture, it was perhaps important to question the impenetrable authenticity of this idea by bringing in notions of the material basis of self-identity and the socio-cultural constitution of the sexed human. Feminists rightly identified such a principle as androcentric and constitutive of sexism and patriarchy. In English-speaking countries, gender was brought in to explicate matters in this direction. Till then, gender was a term used mostly in grammar to denote differences between masculine and feminine forms within language. Feminists extended the meaning of the term to refer also to the differences between women and men in general, moreover to underline the constitutive role of society in forging such differences. Nicholson, in her essay Interpreting Gender, talks of two uses of the word gender in feminist theorization. In the first usage, gender is still used as it was when first developed as a contrasting term to sex to refer to personality traits and behavior that is socially constructed in distinction to the body that is biologically given. On the other hand, gender is also used to refer to any social construction that brings forth the male-female distinction, including those that separate female bodies from male bodies. In other words, gender is a knowledge that establishes meaning for bodily differences. Kernel explains gender as a process of organizing the conduct of everyday life in relation to the reproductive arena defined by the bodily structures and the processes of human reproduction. Such organized structures found almost all documented societies. Masculinity and femininity, according to him, constitute the process of configuring the gender practices related to the structure and generated through the dynamic interaction between people and groups in their historical locations. Theories of constructing femininity and masculinity. Feminities and masculinities have always been understood in relation to each other, sometimes in a stark oppositional binary relation, sometimes through their charged negotiation, and sometimes as a continuum of gender practices. The human species is said to have two genders, man and woman, and a third gender, trans, was said to travel between the two. Most of the argument about the differences between men and women begin with biology. They are said to be separated by different biochemistries, physiologies, and psyches. They are said to have different ways of knowing, working, and even loving. The characteristics are assumed to be oppositional and hierarchical. These two sexes of human species with exclusive, well-defined nature-ordained characteristics are said to be perfect for evolution, such that they can never meet except in heterosexual love. Both scientific and lay literatures claim that the two sexes are born with biological natural attributes that provide the substratum for the subsequent process of socialization into two different gender social roles. The male sex is understood as naturally endowed with the XY chromosome, the testosterone hormone, and the sex differentiated brain hemispheres to be physically strong, intellectually ambitious, and sexually charged, the hallmarks of a masculine gender role. The female quite complementarily, and one can say complementarily as well, develops physically beautiful, intellectually intuitive, and sexually desirable, seductive, the social markers of femininity. Both assume linearity of bodies, sex, beings, gender, and desire, sexuality, and the heteropolarity of the two groups of people are considered inevitable, culminating in a mutual attraction between them in accordance to the laws of nature and essential for the propagation of the human species. Biological models of sex difference occupy the nature side of the age-old question about whether it is a nature or nurture that determines our personalities. It is accepted that the meanings of masculinity and femininity varies across cultures over historical time, among men and women within any one culture, and over a single life course. And yet, accommodating such differences, the cultural and social meanings that accrue to the body one is born with, the experiences and institutional structures that are defined as appropriate for those males and females, and the chain of relational signification between those males and females is held to be constant and treated as unproblematic. Foucault, Laqueur, and Davidson work shows that the binary of male and female as opposites in the biological sex model that has come to rule our sciences and our common sense is not as natural or pre-given as they are made out to be, but a product of a certain time and a certain structure of knowledge of that time. Before the 18th century, women were considered different from men in terms of being an incomplete or inferior version of the more superior species, man, more a quantitative difference. But in and after 19th century, men and women were defined as qualitatively different beings with an exclusive characteristics, an ideology that had its germs in a capitalist industrialist growth in Europe and its emphasis on the public-private division of spheres. The social learning theory. To answer the question, how does one become a man or a woman, the gender roles socialization theory argues that biology plays a role in determining the sex of an individual. Through the chromosomes and the hormones, the nurture or the environment has a major role in influencing the gender identity and the social role taken up in life. The argument is that even if one is born with a certain sex, what gender role one takes up later in life will depend on the environmental cues that are provided during the upbringing. The sex role theory, made popular by Talcott Parsons in the mid-20th century, rejected biological arguments for sex differentiation and located the differentiation of the sex roles in the conjugal family. A strict public-private divide, more or less tenable sexual division of labor, and a regimen of parental stereotypes ensures that almost diametrically opposite gender training received by the boy and the girl in the child. To explain the social patterning of gender roles and their reproduction across generations, Parsons further took recourse to psychoanalysis. In effect, sex role becomes a part of the very constitution of the person through the emotional dynamics of development in the nuclear family. Notion provided Parsons then, as it provides role theory still, with a powerful solution to the problem of how to link a person with society. This theory served to institutionalize masculinity and femininity as a product of different but complementary gender roles, without any way pointing to the overlaps, tensions, and the power processes inherent within gender relations. Such arguments prevented questions on the woman's operation or subordination from being asked in a sociological framework. The question was no longer to explain it but to understand it. The rigid adherence to the inculcation of masculine and feminine traits in the child, combined with the scientific weight of an evolutionary truth about the heterosexual imperative, leaves no space for any alternative or the unconventional forms of behavior or desire without attracting the label of pathological. Moreover, the gender role theory creates a set of standardized and deviant behavior but do not indicate the lived experience of the gendered individuals in reality. By the 1970s, feminist sociologists strongly argued that the sex role theory was problematic, not only being vague but also that it failed to address the questions of women's oppression and inequality by virtue of being located in the framework of men and women being separate but equal. Carrigan argued that relations are interpreted as differences, the greater social power of men and the sexual division of labor are interpreted as sexual dimorphism in behavior. The Freudian psychoanalytical theory of gender development grants importance to the role of the male organ for the ultimate evolution of one's gender role, such that women are said to have a tortuous route to cross before the regular development towards femininity. In Freudian psychoanalysis, a successful resolution of the girl-child's Oedipus complex and the acceptance of a castration makes room for the development of a femininity. As feminine as complementary to the masculine, the feminine in apparent complementary harmony with the masculine. Through the Oedipus complex, a girl is confronted with the fact of a castration. This leads her to give up on her attachment to the mother, who is similarly castrated, and shifts her attachment to father, the possessor of the penis, into another heterosexuality, another male subsequently. This is normal femininity, one who can normally include herself in vaginal heterosexuality and accommodate masculine sexuality. The process of a little girl turning into a woman is also accompanied by an act of repression, giving up on a piece of masculine sexuality, symbolized by her clitoral excitability, such that she can gain accession to her vaginal sexual economy. This successful transfer of erotogenic susceptibility to stimulation that takes place at puberty is a precondition for a development of femininity. Masculinity complex results from the refusal of the girl child to accept the fact of her castration and her inferiority, and this complex develops when she considers herself phallic, when she considers herself part of the masculine sexual economy and refuses the transition into the normal feminine vaginal heterosexuality. Man, on the other hand, is able to regain his leading erotogenic zone unchanged from his childhood. Furthermore, the fact that the women have to give up on the pre-pubertal masculine sexuality and change into another erotogenic zone is said to make them susceptible to the states of neurosis, especially hysteria. Thus, these pathological states are seen as inherent quality of the normal femininity, something the woman cannot escape. In other words, woman is normally pathological. The male child, on the other hand, has a much easier path to the development of a normal masculinity. The boy has what she lacks. Her loss is his victory. Her lack in being creates and confirms his as a phallic, as her being an opposite as well as being superior to her. His journey started through the giving up of his attachment to the mother on realizing that she is castrated and that he may suffer the same fate by his father if he continues with the attachment with the mother. So he easily identifies with the father and shifts his attention from the mother to other desiring other woman and is inculcated into the cult of masculinity. In Freud's scheme, the gender positions of the masculine and feminine are achieved and stabilized through a previously presumed heterosexual matrix. Feminists like Weeks and Butler have critiqued psychoanalytic theories of psychosexual development that take the heterosexual matrix for granted and create rigid bipolar distinctions of sex identity and gender expressions. They have further demonstrated how the script of masculinity and femininity is enacted and sustained through interwoven discourses of gender and sexuality. Section 2. Masculinities: hegemonic, subordinate and complicit. Masculinity has long been interpreted as a synonym for men or maneness. However, there may have been discussions about how masculinity needs to be prized apart from men or the male subject. Seems an easy conflation is made between the two when everything pertaining to men is assumed to be masculinity, and everything talked about masculinity is assumed to be referring to men. Kernel reiterates, rather than attempting to define masculinity as an object, a natural character type, a behavioral average, a norm, we need to focus on the processes and relationships through which men and women conduct gendered lives. Talking about masculinity invariably involves talking about the hierarchical power relation between men and women that is premised on a relation of domination and oppression, working within the feminist insight that the gender is a system of power and not just a set of stereotypes or observable differences between women and men. Masculinity studies emerged as an area of study of unequal power relations and their internalization and reiteration. On the one hand, the 70s saw the development of a wide spectrum of literature on the sociology of gender. Academic research on the woman's status and role in the family focused increasingly on the role of men as well. On the other hand, heterosexual men got together during this time to highlight their agenda of men's liberation, and now the popular gay movement quite inevitably called to question the notion of masculinity and what it is to be a man. Kernel's work on masculinity provides us with a description of how masculinities are constructed through gender and social structures, class, religion, race, and differentiated into hegemonic, subordinated, and marginalized. Kernel's argument by suggesting that masculinity seemed to have three components: a social location that individuals, irrespective of gender, occupy through their individual practices, a set of identifiable practices and characteristics, and individuals embodying these practices and performing masculinity have widespread social and cultural effects. According to Kernel, the gender order is a site of relations of domination and subordination, struggles for hegemony, and practices of resistance. As masculinities compete among themselves and thrive by creating boundaries among men and spread its domination over women and children. It expresses itself through actions that range from disciplining to punishing women and children, queer bashing, male gang fights to international wars, and even combating terrorism. This form of masculinity, which is a certain psychic positioning in the social, has been called hegemonic masculinities. The concept of hegemonic masculinity was proposed to understand better linkages between social models of gender, gender hierarchy, gender feminist critiques of patriarchy, and popular anxieties about men and boys. The notion of hegemonic masculinity, formulated in the 1990s, follows from the Gramsci's notion of hegemony. It is described as a process of establishing and maintaining domination over a larger population through the manufacture of consent and social institutions like media, family that appear natural and inevitable. Heterosexuality and homophobia are the two pillars that prop up hegemonic masculinity. A defining element of this hegemony is that women present themselves as objects of sexual fantasy to men who compete among themselves for this attention. This focus on heterosexuality excludes any sexual interest in men and creates necessarily a pattern of hostility towards homosexuality. In fact, the heterosexual masculine hegemony is believed to have fed by structures of hatred and aversion towards gayness and effeminacy. Kernel argues that to talk about gender relations between men and not just between men and women is a step towards unpacking the intersections of class, race, and other axes of marginalizations, as well as to analyze the gender relations operating within them. Thus, it becomes necessary to study the interfaces with other axes of discrimination, like sexual division of labor, sexual politics at workplace, etc. However, to talk about multiple masculinities is not to collapse them into a character typology, so it is not to talk about a working class masculinity or a Dalit masculinity. Describing hegemonic masculinity is a dynamic process. Kernel reiterates it's rather the masculinity that occupies a hegemonic position in a given pattern of gender relations, a position always contestable. These contestations will give rise to new groups with the new cultural ideals and institutional powers that will erode the basis of existing ones to produce new conditions of dominance. Subordinate and gay masculinities. Some masculinities are placed at the bottom of hierarchy and are equally suppressed. Now there are dynamic negotiations. The study of relations between heterosexual and homosexual men in order to grasp the political hegemony of masculinity. Kernel finds the experiences and practices of homosexual men important to understand the possibilities of change. Research on masculinity must explore how gender operates for those men whom vehemently defined as unmasculine, how masculinity is constructed for them, how homosexual and heterosexual masculinities interact, and how homosexual men experience and respond to change in the gender order. Complicit masculinities. Hegemonic masculinity does not need all members of the group to embody and practice all criteria of the hegemonic formation to be able to enjoy its benefits. The number of men inhabiting the social position of hegemonic masculinity may be small, but the effects produced by these gender practices are reached by a larger number of men who can be seen as supporting and disseminating the hegemony. Kernel writes about this or the relationship between men. Masculinity is constructed in ways that realize the patriarchal dividend without the tensions or the risk of being the frontline troops of patriarchy are complicit in this sense. Section 3. Feminities, female masculinities and trans masculinities. Studies in hegemonic masculinities need to pay more attention to the emerging configuration of femininity and the historical interplay of feminities and masculinities. The understanding that masculinities is constructed helps situate it beyond male bodies. Judith Halberstam asks, if masculinity is not the social and cultural and indeed political expression of maleness, then what is it? Drawing from the insight that heroic masculinities achieve their heroism through the subordination of alternative masculinities, Halberstam claims far from being an imitation of maleness, female masculinity actually affords us a glimpse of how masculinity is constructed as masculinity. Judith Halberstam module, female masculinity, opens ways to talk about gay masculinity, subordinate masculinity, etc. Emphasize femininity. Emphasize femininity is discussed in relation to its role in maintaining gender hierarchy and compliance to patriarchy. Since the notion of hegemony is used to denote power and subordination, the term is not used in the relation to feminities as in the case of masculinities. This is because there are no feminities at a hegemony. All feminities are constructed in the context of women's subordination to men generally. So, Kernel refers to emphasize femininity to denounce the production of a set of gender practices enacted by collectives and communities over space and time. This repeated performance historically and culturally serves to produce and structure the gender hierarchy with its given distribution of power both at the level of material resources as well as the level of meaning and signification. Female masculinities. Judith Halberstam draws attention to what she calls masculinity without men, that is, varieties of masculinities in female bodies. Halberstam cites the example of tomboyism as that extended childhood period of female masculinity where female gender deviance is seen as desiring more freedom and mobility akin to boys. This indulgence is to the extent that it does not threaten the socio-cultural boundaries of gender conformity and is given up by the time adulthood is reached. Judith Halberstam argues that female masculinity is received variously by different ideological streams. To the hetero and homonormative culture, it stands for the misidentification and longing for power that is always out of reach. To the lesbian community, it stands for appropriated patriarchal values that reproduce male supremacy and misogyny among the femaleness. To others, it symbolizes social rebellion and challenging the norms of conventional femininity. Judith, on the other hand, wishes to chart out a cartography of female masculinity that stands away from a mere subverting or opposing of masculine power, rather produces a certain indifference to it through non-engagement. Trans masculinities. Some female bodies person's self-identity does not conform to the assigned gender at birth. They go against convention to take up masculine gender role and desire a change in their sex as well to suit their masculine gender role. They are known as trans men and seek social, medical and legal transition to live as men. Scholars and activists have studied the lives of trans men to critically evaluate men and masculinity. Experience of trans masculinity show up the tensions between cis men or male-bodied masculine persons and trans men or female to male transition masculine person. Trans masculine experiences in a way provide us with a complex view of how gender identity is enmeshed with other social structures in a body that is not born with a male privilege but acquires it at a certain point in life. Section 4. Feminities and Masculinities in India. Masculinity in India is marked by its own unique discourse. A number of tropes have served to anchor these discussions, primary among them being the association of coloniality with effeminacy, celibacy with potent masculinity, and the strengthening of high Brahmanical Hinduism with the unfolding of modern masculinity. Sinha has written on the historico-geographical context of colonialism and colonial modernity, where the notion of emasculated native men in respect to the more masculine scientific Englishmen is said to have shaped much of the discourse between colonizers and colonized. Chaudhary talks about how the figure of Vivekananda became the mascot of masculinity through his motto of renouncement and celibacy. Disciplining the body and cultivating the soul were seen as a gate pass to a higher plane of spirituality, as against the colonizer's obsession with the body and penchant for physical strength and domination. This became the path to reclaiming lost manhood. While Gandhi also prescribed to the norm of celibacy, he took it further by suggesting a transcendence of the man-woman dichotomy to reach the ideal of androgyny. His idea of becoming an authentic man was by aspiring to become both sexes, integrating the humanizing principle of femininity. Chakravarti discusses how the televised serial on the life of Chanakya, known for his shrewd political acumen and professed sexual celibacy, came to define aggressive Hindu masculinity in the post-80s. The careful containment of sexual potency embodied in the figure of Chanakya marked the distinctiveness of Hindu masculinity as opposed to other men and served to strengthen right-wing Hindu fascism in the backdrop of a political social crisis aided by regionalism, casteism and middle-class insecurities during that period. The potent man syndrome comes to be used recurrently to portray the man who preserves his sexual energy in order to use the reinvigorated strength in the service of building the nation whenever the call comes. Srivastava, however, wishes to trace a separate trajectory of heterosexual masculinity that does not necessarily follow the subtext of semen loss anxiety and its link with spiritual potency, though essential to sire a strong and virile nation. Drawing a link between post-colonial modernity and cultures of masculinity in a heterosexual framework, his work stresses the need to explore the emerging culture of sexuality in India as a complex site for the overlapping narratives of modern subjectivity that encompasses the metropolitan-provincial divide, the divide of the culture of urban spaces, the anxieties of masculine immigrant life in the metropolis, the relationship between official and unofficial knowledge systems, the rise of commodity cultures, and the creation of subterranean civil society. Contemporary articulations of masculinity in India can be mapped in two distinct directions, one that is steeped in Hindu nationalist ideology and the other that subscribes to more globalized, dispersed yet hegemonic formations. The pervasiveness of Hindu masculinity becomes apparent periodically in a mass expression through unfolding of events that are believed to have threatened the moral codes defining the sexuality of a more superior race, that is the Hindu, predictably embodied by its women, chastity, domesticity and modesty being the three main coordinates. Be it the screening of film with the same-sex content or painting depicting a Hindu deity in nude, Hindu right-wing response seeks to retrieve and restore the lost honor. Such a campaign is argued to be necessary ostensibly to preserve the cultural, read high caste, moneyed heritage of the Hindu nation and prevent its decadence in the face of Western onslaught. The other less crass, more sophisticated, subtly articulated band of masculinity that owes allegiance to a globalized, socially aware, gender-bending type of man. The new global local man, located in the changing contours of masculinity, the cultural avant-garde, has gone through an image makeover. Mapping the coordinates of a sober, controlled masculinity is a lithe, muscular, shaped body, hairless, beautiful young body, reminiscent of Greek and heroes. Given the ways in which normative masculinity chooses to represent itself, there remains no difference between the normal and its foes, homosexuals or effeminate men. A new cultural politics that invests in the rediscovery of body, thus far imprisoned by respectability, explores the naval markers of masculinity such as androgyny or the metrosexual men. These new and market-friendly expressions of self, however, do not seek to question the basic economy of a heterosexual masculinity. Fashion statements that capitalize on the newfound culture of blurring gender distinctions, however, shy away from any radical questioning of gender and sexual norms. Meanwhile, masculinity gets reorganized in our everyday lives, in our public spheres, in our public realms, in our political imagination, as well as our ethical beings. Masculinity today is much more disaggregated, heterogeneous, complex, benevolent, and perpetually mutating. Forms of masculinity coexist and endlessly seep into each other to produce new configurations of power and social status. In conclusion, in this module on masculinities and feminities, we mapped the contours of the categories of these both. We also understood about how these two concepts and processes such as feminities and masculinities gets constructed. Both feminities and masculinities are also to be understood in the production of sex and gender, and especially also in the context about how the whole idea of heterosexuality contributes to their production. And further, we also through the discussion help to understand how it got consolidated in different forms and where the fractures also take place.